and the popular culture. Why I know about Raymond Petivon fanzines in New York or about the punk scene in London, and I don't know about what happened in Chile. And there are lots of things to do because, and there are lots of connections between contemporary artistic creation and popular culture to discover. And art institutions are places, and they are the only places where we can find some images of the world. Because this is only in art institutions you can watch movies, for example. For example, today it's almost impossible to watch a serious movie independently of the industry of cinema. Yes. And it's in the museum, it's in the art center, it's in the cinematheque. We can find authorship movies. And we can find documentaries too, bringing us a reality hidden in social media. In the biggest social media dominated by corporations, by the TVs, business, etc., etc. This is very important. There are lots of things to discover in this world. Their art is very sensitive to that, as Picasso was when the tragedy of Guernica happened. And I suppose there are always reasons to be militant in this world. That is not an only way for a path, of course. There are several ways how to build an institution, how to build a collection, how to build a program, etc. That means we don't have to be only focused on this militant condition, but at the same time, we have an ethical relationship with the community. We are also supported by a community, and we are building community in a community. This is a very important role of the artistic institution we cannot forget today.
Yes. How about you, Iwona? Still a role for targeting underrepresentation, for being militant?
I think so. I think this question of access and audiences is also very important because we need to persuade people who feel that it's not for them that actually there is something significant and even urgent about having that connection with culture. And it goes back perhaps to some of those early avant-gardes, you know, that the idea about creativity linked to self-fulfillment, to social change, to freedom of expression, to ideas about democracy, to rights, that there is always in every society, there's sort of inequalities that exist. I mean, I'm not necessarily arguing for an art that is only political. I think that the politics comes in the engagement with the art, regardless of if it's pure formalism, like Chilida. I just saw a beautiful show of Chilida. Well, it's not overtly political at all, but the experience of seeing it and recognizing it, somehow that's the big challenge, I think, is building audiences and making people feel that it's relevant. And certainly here, the fact that we have public funding, you know, most of our museums in Britain are free admission. It's a great achievement and something that we have to fight to survive.
And you, Lulu, maybe to finish, what are the battles you think you still need to fight out there?
Well, in the Middle East, of course, it's. I would say the main thing is freedom of expression, and authenticity, and we really need more critics. You know, we need more art journalists. We need more, and we have thankfully. People from the region being educated to become curators, because we're like I said, we're a very young emerging market, so we have a long way to go.
Okay, very good. Well, I don't know if anyone has a question, wishes to challenge any aspect of the conversation we've had here so far. Please. Yes.
Thank you, Catherine. Good afternoon. My name is Alicia Bastos. I'm a curator and artistic director for a small organization. And that's one of the biggest challenges I'm finding at the moment, to set up this space. And the first one of them to being access to funds, because obviously unless you have a great connection with a business that embrace the cause from public funding, they see that, I mean, the Arts Council has clear said in their terms and conditions they don't support any political art. and also the fact that how can smaller organizations, like what I'm trying to create, can engage with larger organizations on the smaller projects. And I would like to ask the three of you. Thank you.
Does any one of you want to pick that up? Iwona, maybe you know Britain, but...
I think it is a great time for national institutions or very established institutions to reach out to more grassroots institutions. Certainly, another issue that we haven't talked about here is the power of the city versus the countryside, or the suburbs in our case, or the favelas, or, you know, it's the edges, it's the margins, and it's also smaller institutions. And I think there is a shift now towards more collegiality and more sharing of expertise and access to collections and so forth. But I would love to see more of that. Certainly in London, we're one of those cities where everything is in the centre. And if you travel around the suburbs, where increasingly people have to live because it's so expensive here, it's a desert. It's really depressing. It's a cultural blank. And as a consequence, we see tremendous impoverishment and even violence. And I would love to see, you know, more collaboration between the very kind of quite well-funded institutions at the centre, working with colleagues, smaller organisations in the outer boroughs of London. The other kind of issue, I think, is the rural communities and making them feel that it's not just a metropolitan elite that is interested in and has access to culture. And that's another big challenge, and I think that's true all over the world. Whenever we hear reports from non-Western countries here, for example, Egypt, we heard about all of the sort of the events around the Arab Spring and so on, all the reports are on Cairo or Alexandria. We never hear about the rural communities in the Middle East, in Africa, in Latin America. And I think that's a big crisis, or in Russia. These are communities which are very stressed, they're very impoverished, and I think culture has a part to play there as well, and that's a whole other issue. But going back to your point, yes, I think there should be more joined up thinking, more partnerships, and more ways that we can help organizations with fewer resources, and collecting institutions could lend more of their works, get more of their works out of store, and have them shown in a greater number of platforms.
That would be great. Joao, you have a...
Cultural institutions should be much more present in the politics of the city and in the politics of the common field. That means instead of giving only to politicians the right to choose which projects have to be financed or not by public money, I feel public institutions could be also agents for that. And, but at the same time, there is today a new challenge in our world, because there is this classical confrontation between the two histories of fundraising between the institutions fundraised by private money or by state money. And today we have a mixed model. And this mixed model can originate lots of variants, from the very corporate program-based mission until a new responsibility happening with the relationship between the private and the public. This can be interesting times, but at the same time there is a serious danger of appropriation of everything under the rules of the big event, of the big spectacle.
That's
and the pressure of the big spectacle is enormous in our society. And this is a terrible problem for very young associations, for example, for artist-run spaces. And I feel the public institution, the museum, the art center, has also to develop a responsibility, identifying them, working with them, originating platforms, and creating new spaces.
Yes,
but
and supporting
programming in the city we share.
I just wanted to ask maybe everybody here, but you also, okay, we've talked about spectacle and event, but doesn't that drive media, and then doesn't that drive audiences? So, for example, here in Britain we had the Turner Prize, which was, when it started, incredibly controversial. And there'd be these ridiculous stories in the press, Tracy Emin's bed, this is rubbish and blah, blah, blah. But it really got people interested. So prizes, for example, even though they're a nightmare for artists, actually they drive huge public interest, partly because in Britain we love gambling, So actually, I don't know if you know, but there is in fact betting shops take odds out on the winner of the Turner Prize. You can place odds. So I'm not actually averse to that. Or the Turbine Hall, Oliver Eliasson's incredible Sun, that spectacular work, which was about spectacle. It said, look, it's all smoke and mirrors. But the way that drove an enormous public interest and yet maintained its integrity as a work of art, it's serious, it has rigor. But I think it's helped all of us, those kinds of programs, generate audiences.
Yes.
But the question is, for example, any museum or big institution today confronts itself with this problem, of course. And to have an audience is beautiful, I must say. It's very beautiful. It's a joy to have our spaces full of people. But there is a big problem. What to do with the people visiting us also, because the relationship with the artwork is an individual relationship. And what we can do when the crowd arrives. This is a new problem, a new challenge also for the institution, for example. And this is an open problem. We have to think more about it, because sometimes we are reducing the space for the individual confrontation with the artwork. For example, today architects design museums for strolling in a museum and not stopping to watch the artwork. Because the museum itself is already a spectacle in its architecture, and this is a problem too. What is the relationship we originate between the artwork and the viewer? This is another problem. But also spectacle, for example, I remember when we did last year the Dali exhibition. This was the most visited exhibition in Reina, Sofia. One of the most beautiful things I realized then was, for the first time, we're showing something like Le Chien Andalou. Imagine, there was a room with the Le Chien Andalou, the entire movie. And for the first time, hundreds of thousands of people watched the Chien Andalou. And this is beautiful, of course. And they were watching it. They were staying there, watching all the minutes of the Chien Andalou. They were queuing to see it. And this is beautiful, of course. The problem is when we are condemned to do only that, because our success can originate a killing effect. And for example, it's very important to have the freedom to program when artists known enough to attract thousands of people, but it's very important to have the freedom to present one artist independently of that, independently of an existing knowledge, an existing reception, to surprise people with something they don't know. Because in the 20th century, the art institutions became spaces to discover what we don't know, and not just to confirm our ideas about life.
Yes. Perfect. Does anyone else want to ask a question to our panel? Well, I think, yes.
Hello. Please, I would like to know your opinion about how militant could be now under the globalist system. Many of the generation from the 60s, 70s and 80s work hardly about representation, where they can be represented on different issues about Latin Americanism, feminism, and other ism too. But under the system of globalists, it's another platform that shows another cracks and maybe shows for militants like a new battleground. As for example, I referred to the globalism's issue on Texturkunst, that consider that not globalism is the same for everybody, and how they will reach into the new system, and how Latin American and feminists will have their representation under the new system that institutions, collectors, press, media are working, and the market all together. I want to ask you, or mention two things and how it will work. For example, in PAC, Patron de Contemporary in Mexico, 3 years ago, in a discussion about feminism, a friend of mine, Judy Werton, feminist, she was saying, oh, 20 or 30 years ago, women has a representation of 40%, men maybe 60. Nowadays, men maybe have 40, transgender, gay, lesbian, etc., 30, and women, after the fight, we reduce our system. Or in the case of Latin America, Mari Carmen Ramira, another militant, was saying when she was doing the catalog of Cruz Diez, when she asked James Turrell or Elforth Kelly to have the reproductions on their catalog, they refused to be there. It's a matter also in the globalist system. Market representation, which first, then how militant in the global system will have a reason to exist, shows another crack, they redefine themselves in another way. The fights are the same or should be others? Okay.
You are from Argentina, you know how to answer that.
Iwona, would you like to?
Well, I was thinking of St. Petersburg and Manifesta, and there was a petition that was sent by email asking people to boycott Manifesta because of the homophobic laws of Putin. And so I was thinking about militancy and global reach because we now have internet, we have petitions that can be generated like that. But then at the same time, I actually thought, no, I shouldn't boycott it because things like Manifesta and biennales and so on, in those kinds of situations, are a way of generating local change, of reaching out to a local community, if nothing else, to say to the gay men and women of St. Petersburg, you're not alone, and we're going to be here for you, you know. So the fight will never stop. We heard last week about a woman who was stoned to death in Pakistan, stoned to death. Another woman who's being hung because she's married to a Christian in Sudan. I mean, it never stops, actually, I'm afraid. Or for gay people in Uganda. And in South Africa, there being, horrible acts of violence. So the struggle continues. We now have these two systems. We have the internet, but it's only accessible to those with means, of course. But we do have this amazing thing, which has taken a bit of a knocking, but I think it's important, the biennales in different locations around the world. And I think they have a vital role to play if they're open and if people are invited to them. So going back to the Sharjah Biennale, which will be again next year, it would be marvellous if everybody from the Gulf were to go there and to see the representation of gay artists and women artists and so on, and maybe it will change attitudes a little bit. So
perfect. Yeah. Well, I think that's a great way to conclude, Iwona. Thank you very much. I think there is definitely still a case for militancy, both for institutions and for artists. I think in those, and particularly in difficult areas of the world. I think our next panel will explore the same issue from the point of view of the collector, a specialized and non-specialized collector. But meanwhile, I would like to thank you very, very much for participating in the panel, and I'd like to thank you for your patience in listening to us. Thanks a lot.